I've traveled to the planet Earth to understand its political conflict. I'm here in Israel, where there appears to be some debate over whose land it is. Israel is suppressing the Palestinians. I'm not just saying this because I'm Jewish, but it's the Palestinian groups that are being violent. Can you explain how this situation happened? Okay, so our story begins in ancient Egypt, where the Jews were enslaved by the Egyptians. And by the way, on a side note, there are some people who are anti-Semitic that think that the Jews control the banking system and they are all these evil bankers. Let me ask you this. If the Jews controlled the Federal Reserve, you really think we'd put a pyramid on the bills? We were enslaved to build that. You think I ever want to see a pyramid again? You know, I heard a rumor that aliens built the pyramids. I did no such thing. Where did you hear that? My college professor told me a theory that because the pyramids are made from such heavy, massive rock, that there's no way, given the technology of the time, that humans could have made it. Why is it that left-wingers want to make special provisions for African American slavery, but not for the Jews? Okay? The Jews had it rough. We lifted cement blocks so heavy that you think that it's impossible and aliens must have done it. Okay? The Jews had it rough. We lifted cement blocks. You picked cotton flowers. Come on. I find it interesting how conservatives have no issue with making fun of African Americans, women, or Islam, but when it comes to criticizing Israel's military actions, suddenly they call you an anti-Semitic. Oh, you don't want to bomb brown women? What do you hate the Jews? And what you're saying is ridiculously offensive. In fact, you're putting my safety at risk, because when I'm out on the street, people are going to think that I'm you. Your safety's at risk. If anybody threatens you, just say, "Oh, that was my twin." As far as you're concerned, everybody's in the gang, the CRIPS. Just don't get caught wearing red. This entire story is a myth. There is zero direct proof that the Jews were enslaved in Egypt or exiled after with Moses. There's no mention of it in Egyptian records, and there was no economic downturn after the Jews left. Your only proof is the Torah, which is ridiculous, because the very thing you're complaining about is being forced to build burial sites for a different crazy religion. So you're saying, how can anyone doubt that God, through a burning bush, told Moses that the Egyptian religion is mythological bullshit? I mean, come on, Ra with the bird-faced god of the sun? Shut up with your myths while I spread the true word of the Lord. I think we got sidetracked, although this is possibly still more educational than public schools. So the Jews were enslaved in Egypt building pyramids. So what happened next? Now, according to the Torah, God unleashed 10 plagues, which were so vicious that the Egyptians just let the Israelis go. One of the plagues was turning water into blood. Back then, ruining the water supply was called a plague. Now it's called fracking. And Moses led the newly freed people to the Promised Land. Wow, that's amazing. So they just marched right to the Promised Land? Well, no. They got lost and wandered the desert for 40 years. Hey, here's a fun fact. Did you know Waze, the GPS app, is actually made by an Israeli company? I guess after Moses wandered the desert for 40 years, they said, hey, let's never get lost again. So then the Jews settled on the land we now refer to as Israel. Wow, so they lived a happy life in this new land? Well, not exactly. Foreigners came in and might have taken some of the land. Nope, they lost it immediately. Apparently, Jews can lift heavy cement blocks, but can't throw a spear for shit. Like I said, I think aliens built the pyramids. This list displays in sequential order every group to conquer the land, starting with Babylonia. So Babylonia was the first of many to steal this land. Why is Babylonia important? Babylonia was a city-state that in ancient times had the first ever recorded war in human history between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which is modern-day Iraq. So in Iraq, they've been fighting since literally the dawn of human history, but thankfully some American troops are here to bring tranquility to the situation. I am so calm now that American troops are here. But I digress. So first it was Babylonia, then Alexander the Great took it from them, then Rome took it from him. I've heard humans mention Rome before. Rome was an empire, but it was also a democracy, which is kind of a weird combination. It's like, hey, I'll conquer you, but then in a few years you'll be native, you can vote me out. Actually, it's not that weird, right? Because it's like America now. And after Rome, there were many more takeovers. Okay, so what does this have to do with modern Israel? Nothing! That's my point. Wrong. It's very relevant to the situation because every single group on that list conquered the land from the previous group. So each member on the list is basically going, hey, let's steal their land. They have no rights. Let's jack that. But then they lose it to another group and go, oh, the injustice. Oh, how could that group take from us? This is horrible. Man, how could the Arabs bitch and complain when they stole the land from the European Crusaders and the Romans? They have no rights. You have no rights with shit that you stole. That's like when the police take your bail money and you're like, but I robbed that legitimately from the bank. I mean, you have no right to take my robbery money. It's not a valid claim to land when it was 2,000 years ago. The Jews are like the first person at the party that claims they wrote their name on the beer pong list, but nobody can find this list. Okay, where is it? Huh? The Arabs are making claims from over 700 years ago with the Ottoman Empire. So you're going, 2,000 years ago, that's no good. But 700 years, this number is legitimate history. There are better historical records for more modern periods of time. There's numerous archaeological studies from cultural items and artifacts dated in that specific time period that showed that the Hebrews settled in that region. When it comes to climate change, liberals are like, oh, I can tell by the exact width of this tree bark what the temperature was 1,000 years ago. But when they find Hebrew writings in stone in the exact places we're talking about, I wouldn't make any assumptions. If Hebrew writing in stone is no good, then what proof do you want? Moses' tweets? Yo, I be settling in Tel Aviv, and the matzo balls are to die for. Hashtag lost profit. There's an important distinction. You're claiming the land rights of a group merely by ethnicity, whilst the Palestinians are the actual lawful, legal, direct descendants of the specific landowners who were evicted from their homes. You have proof that people of the Jewish religion were there, but no proof that these specific Israeli settlers are related to them in any legally meaningful way. Otherwise, you could use this excuse to get out of all crimes. What do you mean, officer? I'm not loitering in public. I own this garden as a direct descendant of Adam and Eve. If the Jewish claims to land are no good from 2,000 years ago, then what's going to happen in 2,000 years in the future? Will the Palestinian claims be wiped clean? If so, Israel could just wait it out. In the year 4000, we'll remake this video and switch colored shirts. I'll use your arguments against you. No, you're misunderstanding me. The modern day Israelis have zero claims to the land ownership. According to the book The Invention of the Jewish People by Shlomo Sands, the Jewish religion spread primarily through conversion. So the European Ashkenazi Jews who fled from the Holocaust and settled in Israel became Jewish through conversion. Converting to a religion does not give you land ownership rights because people of your religion used to live there. If it did, then Halliburton's Dick Cheney could just convert to Islam and he'd be entitled to all the oil in Iraq, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Furthermore, the historical documents in this book make it very clear that the Jews were never exiled from the land by the Romans. They were just persecuted. So for the first few generations they were persecuted, and then eventually their children's children assimilated into the Roman society. Some converted to other religions like Christianity or Islam. So here's the great irony. The modern-day Palestinians, as direct descendants of the locals, have more genetically in common with the ancient Hebrews than do the European Jews who fled the Holocaust. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you in modern day took a random Palestinian off the streets of Gaza and an Israeli military officer, the Palestinian would have more DNA from Moses' ballsack than does an Israeli Defense Force sniper. The European Jews, they just converted. You can't choose to be the chosen people. So while you were babbling on, I got to reading the entire book, and it's a bunch of nonsense. First of all, the author's name is Shlomo Sand. So he's a Jew whose last name is Sand, who says his people are not from the desert. Oh, okay. Page 131. Nowhere in the abundant Roman documentation is there any mention of a deportation from Judea. You gotta be kidding me. Your historical proof is what the Romans said? What? And earlier in this episode, you said the Jews were not enslaved in Egypt because your proof was Egyptian records. You gotta be kidding me. The Romans' records, the Egyptians' records. What are you gonna quote next? Hitler's diary? If I get murdered, I'm not putting you in charge of jury selection. For the 100th time, the Old Testament of the Bible is not a historical source that you can cite. Yes, the Romans might be biased, but they don't mention 10 plagues or turning water into blood. Is the only claim to the land from 2,000 years ago? No. In 1917, the British promised the land with the Balfour Declaration. So you expect the Palestinians to go, I ignore the word of your God. But let me listen to the British. What is the Balfour Declaration? It's a document from the British government that publicly proclaims that a piece of land that the British owned is now going to be used for the Jewish homeland during World War I. The British conquered the land from the Ottoman Empire with World War I. And when I say they conquered it, I mean they bribed Arabs in Saudi Arabia to revolt against the Ottomans. What do you think, the British actually want to fight? The Ottomans are coming! Bribe the Arabs to revolt. The Germans are coming! Call the Americans. The Jews and Arabs are fighting! Pass it off to the UN. I'm confused. The conservative twin just said that the British promised Israel to the Jews. They did. The British promised it to the Jews, and they promised it to the Arabs, and they promised it to themselves as part of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The British promised it to everybody and their mother. I am from the Roman Empire, and the British promised us the land. I am from the Babylonian Empire, and you, sir, are mistaken, for the British promised us the land. Wrong. The British are not land sluts because they specifically mentioned in the Balfour Declaration to not interfere with the Palestinians' homeland when creating a homeland also for the Jews. So the British from the original document had the intention of a two-state solution. The British have no right to divide up land they stole through imperialism. The British might as well promise the Jews India. At least with India, the British let them be free when Gandhi starved himself. But starvation is just another day in the life of the Gaza Strip. Maybe that's why the British never let Palestine go. I'm fasting to resist British authority. Ha! You can't fast for political purposes when you have no food to begin with. That's like boycotting cuts in food stamps through starvation. So if both sides got land from the British, then why didn't they live in peace? Because the British allowed the Arabs to block incoming immigration during the Holocaust. These people are suffering during a genocide, and you want to stop them from having a safe refuge? But the Palestinians didn't cause the Holocaust. Now, while I'll admit it wasn't a nice thing to do, ultimately the Palestinians have the right to defend their homeland. And it's ironic that a conservative is upset someone took a tough stance on immigration. At least they weren't dumb enough to try and build the giant wall. Let's end the episode here. Earth's culture of hate has its root in ignorance. Please share this video because the world is what you make it. In part 2, we'll dive into why the British plan failed and the wars that followed it. I'll see you then. What is this? My lord, it's proof that the Romans are not the true owners. This is blasphemy. Moses' tweets? Hashtag lost prophet.